Good morning, everyone, especially to our instructor in this subject, Miss Duna Ruth Talo. Good morning, ma'am. I'm Joerah Calamba, and today I will discuss a certain topic that is very essential because this is something like a continuation from our past discussion. But before that, is anyone absent this session? None. Very good. Okay, so our topic in this morning is all about analytic and holistic assessment. So are you familiar with these two types of assessment?
Yes.
Well, let's see. But before that, so as you can see, I have here two different rubrics. So I want you to see their differences. So it's not necessarily that you read what is being written, but I just want you to see the difference based on how each rubric was constructed. So as anyone can determine the differences in this one and this one? Yes?
For me, the first rubric it is more detailed, while the second one is generalized.
Wow, very good for your idea. Now, in these two rubrics, which do you think is the rubrics used for analytic assessment and the rubrics used for holistic assessment? Yes?
I think the first one is analytic, while the second one is the holistic.
Are you sure?
Yeah, definitely.
Well, let's see. So I have here a handout, and I want you to get one and pass. Okay, so none handouts?
Yes.
Okay, so everybody please read what is analytic rubric. Analytic assessment.
Analytic assessment refers to specific approach in the assessment of learning outcomes.
Thank you. So, based on the definition that you have read earlier, when we say analytic assessment, it is something like a specific approach in the assessment of the learning outcome. So, in this assessment, so we can say that the assessment is made based on the importance of the student's performance. So, for example, if you are a teacher, so you want to know the specific aspect of your students in terms of grammar, in terms of organization or organizing their details, in terms of terminology, in terms of their style in writing. That's why you assign them to create an informative essay with specific rubrics that of course included there is the grammar, the organization, the terminology, and the style. Now, maybe you're asking, why? Nganong ka nag-infographic essay or the informative essay rather? Nganong informative essay maipahimo? So, as what I have said earlier, that the assessment in analytic assessment is something like create or made based on the importance of the performance. So, of course, you want to know the strength. You want to know the weaknesses of the student in terms of their grammar or in terms of the specific aspect in their performance. So, those are the grammars, the organization, and so on and so forth that I already discussed earlier. Now, by that, you can determine if your students are good in grammar. You can determine if your students are weak in terms of grammar. And you can determine if they are good in organizing their ideas. So, did you get what I mean?
Yes.
I can't hear you. Did you get what I mean?
Yes.
Okay, so what I mean, Miss Lenny?
As what I have learned, it refers to a specific approach in the assessment that the teacher wants to her assessment of what her student want to achieve.
Oh, very good. So, what you want to say is that this assessment is used for a teacher who want to know specific or who want to do an assessment wherein she will know the specific aspect of the student's performance. Am I right?
Yes.
Yes, very good. Okay, now what is the rule of a teacher in analytic assessment? Everybody, please read.
The role of teacher in analytic assessment. Monitor students' progress and provide feedback to the learners.
Okay, so the role of the teacher in analytic assessment is what? To provide feedback and to monitor the students' progress. So as you can see, diba, kung maghimo taog essay, sometimes, especially kung there's a specific rubrics that will test our grammars, sometimes we can see a feedback at the back of our papers. Nakatry na mo, ana?
Yes.
Ano bitaw mo tanga nag-feedback ng box atong kanang papel nga kanang you're good in terms of grammar, but sometimes the organization of your thoughts and ideas are basta nga na, no? I know nga, you know what I mean.
Yes.
Okay, now what is the role of the students in analytic assessment?
The role of students in analytic assessment to develop their skills in a certain aspect of specific tasks expected from them.
Okay, so of course, there's a rubrics that are presented. So, kung naanang rubrics, ma-develop yun ang skills sa usa ka bata. Especially kung kay boss, kung unsay gipangayo sa teacher na possible results sa iyahang gihimo. So, I'm sorry about the background because we can control this there in our environment. Okay, so are you, or nakasabot na mo kung unsay analytic assessment?
Yes.
Okay, now, let's move on to holistic assessment. But by the way, before I forgot, what do you think is the reason why teacher use analytic assessment? Anyone? Yes, Zyrely?
Akong nasabtan, analytic assessment is kanang na-provide siya og mga details nga as a student amo ang ma-visualize unsa amo angay buhaton aron ma-graduhan mi or ma-ratean mi in or depende sa mga kuan sa iyang rubric. So analytic assessment is moto.
Thank you for your detailed answer. Okay, let's give her a round of applause. Very good. Okay, so the reason why the teacher use analytic assessment for the students to visualize or para mas naa sila idea on kanang what the teacher wants to achieve or unsay gusto sa teacher nga ipahimo or mas ma-visualize nila kung asa sila dapat to improve or unsa mga skills ang dapat nila nga i-develop. Now, let's move on to holistic assessment. Everybody, please read what is holistic assessment.
Holistic assessment refers to a global approach in the assessment of student learning outcome.
Okay, so by reading the definition, can you differentiate kanang the two, the analytic and holistic, based on the definition that you have read? Yes, Kriza? Sige, unsa man?
Analytic assessment refers to a specific approach or specify jud ang approach in the assessment, while sa holistic assessment is refers to global approach or more siya wide or broaden yung assessment of student learning outcome.
Wow, very good. So, ingana na siya, no? Sayo na dyan mo suggest subconcept from its word, holistic. It is globally approach of the assessment. While when we say analytic, specific approach of the assessment. Now, according to Sadler 2009, so Sadler pointed out that in holistic assessment, the teacher or the assessor should have to develop a complex mental response to the students' works or to evaluate the students' work. So, what do you think is the reason nga nung i-point out man ni Sadler nga dapat ang teacher naa siya ma-develop niya ang complex mental response sa mga students' work? Is anyone? And nakabantay man ako bang teachers bitaw nga kung magpahimo og example reflection paper, most of the teacher or something like some of the teacher will grade a reflection paper based kung unsay gitas-on, right?
Yes.
Kana bitaw ko bang teacher nga basta kay taas mo ri dako grado, kani kay mubo, 5 ra ni nakatry mo gingana.
Yes.
Okay, so something like that. That's why Sadler pointed out that the teacher should have a complex mental response because in holistic assessment, it is something like global. Wala siya specific nga wala siya specific na aspect sa students' performance. So something like the teachers should need and should develop a mental or complex mental response in order for her to justify or to give valid justification of students' grade. So, kanang nakasabot mo?
Yes.
Okay. Now, what is the examples of holistic assessment?
Group presentation, peer assessment, and self-assessment.
Okay, group presentation, pair assessment, self-assessment. So, it included sa ani ang portfolio, reflection papers, and journals. So, when we say group presentation, so it could be role play. Diba, ugnay mag-role play. Ang kasagaran ngay tanawon sa teacher ana is kung nagkasinabot ba sila. If the students nakasag-o ba sa ilahang line. So kung nakasag-o, so for the use of holistic rubbers, for example, in group presentation, role play, makagrado ka og 4 kung nagpuyog ang pagkahinglo sa inyong role play, ang pagkasag-o sa inyong role play, kung nagkahiusa basad mo sa inyong role play. Then, makagrado ka og 3 kung ang inyong role play wala dili organize. Unya wala ka sag-o sa linya. Makagrado ka og 2 kung nagkagubot mo. Unya makagrado ka og 1 kung mura gyud nagduwa-duwa sa inyong role play. So did you see the difference?
Yes.
Yeah, something like it's generalized. This is something like education for the student as whole, or the education for whole student. Now, what are the importance of having holistic assessment?
Can reduce the time for assessment and can promote greater equality in the assessment process. Can help improve students' achievement. Promote social awareness and a sense of responsibility with self-confidence among the students.
Okay, so the importance of having holistic. So, as what I have said, in holistic assessment, it is something like education as a whole person or as a whole student. And by this, if we use holistic assessment, not only the academic skills will develop, it will also develop the cognitive, the physical, the values, the emotional growth of the students will also focus when it comes to holistic assessment. So, for the further discussion, Ms. Cañizares will discuss for the rest. Thank you so much for your cooperation.
So, what is analytic assessment? Analytic assessment refers to specific approach in the assessment of learning outcomes. Meaning to say, students are assessed based on specific aspects of the assessment in order for them to show and apply how far their understanding is. The important word to remember here is the word specific. Why? It's because analytic assessment considers different domains or aspects in assessing the students, and also not specifying the aspects needed to be judged and needed for students to be met will make it difficult during the assessment. It's because students will not know what aspects they have to pay attention to. They will not be guided specifically as well on what to do, which will result to an unorganized assessment and differing outcomes, which is why analytic assessment tend to be specific. Next, it is criterion reference. Why? Simply because it uses a criteria in judging the student's performance. There is a set and specific standard nga kailangan mabuhat or ma-meet sa students in order to make the assessment a meaningful one, and also in order for the skills of the students to be tested, which is why it is criterion reference. It based on a given set of criteria. Then, students are given feedback on how well they are doing on each important aspect of specific task expected from them. In analytic assessment, students are given feedback in different aspects. In the reason that it helps the students know which area they have to improve more or which area they are good at. Then, assessment is made specific based on the importance of the performance. So, as what I have said earlier, the assessment is specified in order for students to be guided on the important aspects they have to perform in the given performance task. Like for example, if you are going to test their singing skills, but then you didn't specify what factors or aspects they have to focus on, or you didn't tell them specifically what they have to do, so in the end, it is questionable how did you able to judge the assessment when in the first place you are not being specific on what you expect from them. Moreover, kung dili man good is specific, there is a tendency that the assessment will be perceived by the students differently from what your teacher is expected, which is why analytic assessment should be specified. And lastly, assessment should not be undertaken in part but must address the whole performance. So, in analytic assessment, the parts that needed to be given attention to must respond to the whole performance. Kaya diba, before ta makabuog usa ka piece, we have to gather first its parts or pieces in order to make it a whole piece. Now, let's move on to the role of the teacher in the analytic assessment. First, we have they monitor student progress. Given that there is a criteria being set that needs to be met, that will allow teachers to monitor the progress of the students. The set criteria will be the basis in assessing the students. In addition, with the constant feedback they give towards the students, they are able to monitor the improvements being made by the students. Second, they provide feedback to the learner. So I mentioned earlier about the feedback. Since teachers are the one who makes the assessment criteria, therefore, they are also the ones who provides the feedback towards the students. Teachers provide feedback to allow students to keep on track of their progress. Without feedback, students will not be able to improve their skills and will not be motivated as well to keep on improving or to keep on developing their skills. That would be all for the role of teacher in analytic assessment. And aside from the teachers, students also have the role in analytic assessment. And we have two. First, to develop their skills in certain aspect of specific tasks expected from them. And number two, to receive feedback from the teachers. So, let's now move on to the reason as to why teachers uses analytic assessment. So, why do teachers use analytic assessment? It's because it provides a nuanced and detailed image of the student performance by taking different aspects into consideration. In using analytic assessment, teachers will be able to know what particular aspects the students excelled at or need some improvements. Since the crucial aspects of the whole performance is intended for students to perform are specified, it will be easier for teacher to determine what are those strengths and weaknesses. It will be easier also for them to assign grade or score at the end of assessment.
Now in analytic assessment, there comes a rubric being used called as analytic rubric. What is analytic rubrics? It is a two-dimensional rubrics with levels of achievement as columns and assessment criteria as rows. It allows you to assess participants' achievements based on multiple criteria using a single rubric. In analytic rubric, you can assign different weights or value to different criteria and include an overall achievement by totaling the criteria. Analytic rubrics may use a points, custom points, or text-only scoring method. Points and custom points analytic rubrics may use both text and points to assess performance. With custom points, Each criterion may be worth a different number of points. For both points and custom points, an overall score is provided based on the number of points achieved. The overall score determines if learners meet the criteria determined by instructors.
At this juncture, let's talk about the main advantage of analytic rubric. We have two main advantages of analytic rubric. First, it gives students a clearer picture behind the scores they got. It's because of the specified aspects which gives students a clearer picture of their performance. Tungod kay specific man, makaingon sila nga, ingani de ang scores because of this and that. Dili na sila mahibong nganong ingana ilang score nga nakuha, kay naa may gi-follow nga criteria ang teacher sa pag-judge. So, students will understand it easily why they have that kind of score after the assessment as it is being reflected already in the criteria. Second, it is also good for a teacher because it gives her the ability to justify score without having to explain everything in later conversation. So, it is no longer necessary for teachers to explain everything about the assessment outcomes as it is already reflected in the criteria being set, right? Maka-justify ang teacher nganong ingani or ingana nga score ang gihatag sa bata tungod kay naa may gi-follow nga criteria. It only means nga wa jud na gama-gama ang teacher sa maong result kay naaman siya may mapakita nga evidence which is the criteria. If analytic rubric has advantage, it also have a disadvantage. First, it is time-consuming or creating them takes a lot of time. Why analytic assessment is time-consuming? It's because dugay ang pag-set sa mga aspects nga mag-contribute kung unsa ka importante ang usa ka performance task rather. Dapat huna-hunaon pagayo kung unsa man jud ang ipabuhat or buhaton sa mga students in order for the assessment to be meaningful, and also providing a description for the feedbacking takes a lot of time, which is why dugay jud gamon ang analytic rubric. Then let's move on to the second disadvantage, which is students won't necessarily read the whole thing. Unlike the holistic assessment, which is the opposite of analytic assessment, it focuses on the performance as a whole, wherein in analytic, it only focuses on the parts of the performance. Given that in analytic assessment, specific naman ang angay nga mabuhat or mamit sa students, so they will only focus on that specific aspects. It is no longer necessary for them to read or be knowledgeable on the whole thing as they only have to focus on its parts. And with that, students will kind of miss out the whole part, which makes it a disadvantage. Is there a clarification regarding the analytic assessment? If none, let's now move on to the holistic assessment, which will be tackled by Ms. Roselyn Compoc.
Good afternoon once again. So we are done discussing about the analytic rubric. And now I am going to introduce you to the other type of rubric because we as future educators, as we begin to teach, it is very normal for us teachers to give our students assessments and activities. And it is very important for us to think on how to grade or rate our student tasks or activities. And a rubric is a big help. Now, I am going to present you another example of rubric. And what have you observed or what have you noticed in this presented example of rubric? Yes, compared to the analytic rubric, these performances or these criteria given here are assessed individually, while here in this rubric it is assessed as a whole and it is just indicated as a one single score. This presented rubric is an example of a holistic rubric. And what are the characteristics of this rubric? So its first characteristic is it is single criterion. So how this holistic rubric being single criterion?
So, holistic rubrics assess performance across multiple criteria as a whole. Is indicated by one single score. So it means many criteria of performance are covered. So in grading or rating using holistic rubric, you just look into the performance and give one holistic score to the whole performance. So example, ano na itong rubric na ipakita? In the scale of 4, its description is all food is perfectly cooked. Presentation surpasses expectation, and recipient is kept exceptionally comfortable at all times. So, pila man nga criteria or pila ka performances ang gi-rate ani niya. So, we'll count. First, the food. Kung sa analytic pa ni siya, kung gitagsa-tagsa man ni sa analytic, it is the food, the presentation, and the comfort. So, ano nga rubric, ano nga holistic rubric, it is rated as a whole. Kung rate ka using a holistic rubric, muhatag na ka og 1 score. So, balik ko na to, we'll count the criteria that being rated in this scale. First, the food is perfectly cooked. That's number 1. Next, presentation surpasses expectation. Second, and last, recipient is kept exceptionally comfortable at all times. So, imo to ikatulo. So, this holistic rubric is a single criterion because ikaw nga mismo mag-rate, muhatag ra ka og only one single score to the whole performance. The next characteristic of a holistic rubric is it is general kind. Holistic rubric is general kind because it lists 3 to 5 levels of performance along with the broad descriptions of the characteristics that define each level. So, the levels can be labeled with words or numbers. So, the levels here in holistic rubrics can be labeled with words or numbers. For example, sa numbers, given an example rubric atong gipakita, it is labeled as 1, 2, 3, and 4. Example of labeled with words. It can be labeled as beginning to exemplary. And for letters, it can be labeled as letter A to letter F. So in other words, each level of performance, all the criteria that need to be evaluated are defined together. So what makes this rubric holistic is that all the characteristics are lumped together. And that's the characteristics you need to remember about the holistic rubric. So first, it is single criterion. Next, it is general kind that can be labeled with words, numbers, and letters. What are the advantages of this holistic rubric? So first, the advantage of this holistic rubric is it takes less time. Holistic rubric saves time as it minimizes the number of decisions raters make or the teachers make. That's why holistic rubric tends to get used where a quick judgment needs to be made. It was termed as broad because one level covers multiple criteria. As it said in its characteristic, it's single criterion. Yes. And its second advantage is it's easy on teachers. So why it's easy on us? Yes, this holistic rubric is easy on us, future teachers, because it is written generally as they contain broad description. And it is also beneficial for our students, for it gives emphasis on what learners is able to demonstrate rather than what he or she cannot do. And that are the advantages of a holistic rubric. First, it takes less time. And second, it's easy on teachers. Now, we will proceed to its disadvantage. So the disadvantage of this holistic rubric is it doesn't provide targeted feedback. It doesn't provide specific feedback about trends or areas to improve because it's just scored generally
or in your whole performance, only one single score is provided. And we students, or for our future students, dili sila mahibaw og asa sila nga area nga nag-uwang, because as said, it's just scored generally, or it's just indicated as one single score. So that's all the information about a holistic rubric, its characteristics, its advantages, and its disadvantage. So always remember that the difference between this analytic rubric and holistic rubric is that this analytic rubric identify and assess components of students' work, while this holistic rubric assess and identify students' work as a whole. So in analytic, it assesses components, and in holistic, it assesses as a whole.